First, I want to talk a little bit about progress. So this amazing tote bag was in my hotel room when I arrived yesterday. Do you still have faith in the future? It says. I still have faith in the future is the answer. So we'll leave that there. I guess you've all got the same thing written on your tags if you're here. This is an interesting statement to make. This is an interesting statement to give me because I don't believe in progress. Sorry, brain bar. But let me explain a little bit more about what I mean there. If nobody's going to come and throw me out for not believing in progress at an event that has faith in the future, let's think a little bit about the statements that I still have faith in the future. Faith is an interesting word to use in this context. Because, I mean, the future's coming, right? Whether I believe in it or not, it doesn't really matter. It's like gravity. You know, time just happens. So what's the faith component? That references what I call progress theology, which is distinct from just time, where one thing happens after another. Progress is a set of ideas about time and about what history is and what history means that suggests history is linear. It starts somewhere and it's going to somewhere else, and that has a moral story attached to it. We're starting somewhere worse and we're going somewhere better. That idea cannot be separated. Even it seems supposedly we live in a secular age now. You know, most people don't go to church. You know, the attendances are declining. A lot of people say they don't really know what they believe in anymore. But the idea that we live in a world where progress is a thing, where progress is real, cannot be separated from Christian theology. It originates in the Christian story of death, judgment, heaven, and hell. This idea that the history of the universe began somewhere with the creation and the fall and so on. And it's going to somewhere, which is to say the day of judgment and where everything becomes great. I mean, that's a very reductive outline of 2,000 years of theology. The main difference between progress theology and Christianity is that for progress, that all happens in the here and now. There's no spiritual element to it. There's no sense that any of that is transcendent or happens beyond the grave. All the improvements happen. Everything, the from and the process and the to, all happen now in history. There's no death, judgment, heaven, and hell. That things just go on getting better as we go from somewhere to somewhere else forever. Really? What's the content of that? The content seems to be more freedom and more stuff. But is that really progress? I mean, yes, things change over time. You know, but it's very difficult to say in an absolute sense that this is measurably getting better in an absolute sense. I mean, life is obviously not the same as it was 1,000 years ago. It's not even the same as it was when my grandmother was alive. But some things get better, other things get worse. You know, we're less cruel to animals on a day-to-day basis, but we have factory farming. You know, we're more prosperous, but at the cost of ecological depredations and some say oncoming disaster. Does it balance out on the positive? Who knows? I don't know, certainly. And the only way you could know, you know, in totality, in aggregate, that things were balancing out on the positive side as a linear movement from somewhere worse to somewhere better, would be if you knew literally everything. And that gives you a clue to the theology, the religious aspect of this, which is buried under what seems to be a secular idea. It really is, so progress, this idea that everybody just takes for granted, to my read of it, is a theology in disguise. So here we are, supposedly in a secular age, at a meeting where we want to talk about having faith in the future. And I want to put to you all that there's a great deal of disguised theology bound up in the premises that underlie that. I don't believe in progress in that sense, but you know, before the brain bar organizers come to kick me out, I want to say it doesn't follow from this that I believe the arc of history. Just because I don't believe the arc of history has a moral dimension in the progress theology sense, and I don't believe that we can attain never-ending progress in this world, that seems unfalsifiable, which is to say, implausible. It doesn't follow from that we can't talk about what progress, what is changing. It doesn't mean we can't talk about change. It doesn't mean we can't talk about the circumstances of our world or its politics or indeed morals. We just have to be clear about what we're discussing. So when I realized, and this is really what began my story of thinking about progress and about feminism and their relationship. Because at the point in my late 20s, when I realized I was a progress atheist, or at least a progress agnostic, this left me with a real dilemma, because I've been a feminist pretty much ever since I was about 12. And I'll tell you the story of how I came to be a feminist to begin with. So I have two brothers. My dad was pretty old-fashioned. My family setup was pretty old-fashioned. I had a stay-at-home mum and and a working dad. And when I got to about 12, I began to realize that there was something going on. Every day at mealtimes, my mum would set the table, she'd prepare the food, we'd all come and eat. And then afterwards, my dad would just get up and leave the table, and he'd leave someone, implicitly my mum, to clear up again afterwards. And then as I got older, my brothers began to copy him. And I was watching this, and I was thinking, oh, hang on a minute. It left me with a dilemma. Do I assert my equality with my brothers on the basis of, I'm not one of these second-class people who has to do the dishes. So I assert my equal standing with my brothers in the family by getting up and leaving. Or do I express solidarity with my mum as the other female in the house by helping her with the dishes? It felt like an impossible dilemma. I still don't really know the answer to who does the dishes, but that was the beginning of my inquiry and a lot of reading into the question of men and women and how we live together. And it really started me on the journey, which then led me through many, many years of very fierce and passionate commitment to feminism, which I still hold. But if you consider progress just in the context of the women's situation, so here was my dilemma. When I realized I no longer believed in progress, I was then confronted with the question of what about feminism? Things seem to be a lot better on a lot of metrics for women than they were, say, 200 years ago. So if you don't believe in progress, does that mean you think women should go back to when we couldn't vote? And people would sort of present this as a gotcha. I'd be like, I'm not sure progress is a thing. And they'd be like, aha, what about the vote? Do you want to go back to being the property of some guy? I'm like, do you want to go back to not being allowed to work? No, clearly not. I sort of grappled with this question. And I began to think through what's actually going on when we talk about the women's movement and what we talk about what actually happened there. And I read a little bit more, particularly into the 19th century women's movement. And I began to realize once you remove the story of moral progress from the picture, the progress theology, if you like, what's actually going on over the course of if you look at the history of the 19th century women's movement from the late 18th century in England, because industrialization began so early there, what's actually happening there is women's response to a total transformation of society, which came about because of the Industrial Revolution. So in the pre-modern age, the agrarian, the pre-industrial world, the basic economic and social unit was the household. I mean, I'm talking about England here. I'm less familiar with the situation in Hungary, where I'm sure the trajectory has been a little bit different here. But in England, in the pre-modern world, the basic unit was the economic and social unit was the household. The married couple that were at the center of the household were not considered separately. The unit was the household. Individuals weren't really thought of as economic units. And work happened within the household. And a lot of that would have been artisan work or subsistence agriculture. And it was gendered, but both sexes worked. So, for example, in an agrarian setting, men might produce raw materials and women process them into subsistence goods or products or utensils for the household. There was no question of one sex being economically dependent on the other. Both sexes, both men and women, were economically active in the context of a productive household. And for women, that happened in conjunction with raising children. Now, I'm not saying that all of this was idyllic necessarily. It came with its own problems and challenges. As I said, I don't believe in progress, but that also means I don't think things are getting worse. Things just change. But what happened when the Industrial Revolution transformed the way we work was that work left the home. The basic economic unit were gradually shifted from being a productive household to being individuals, implicitly male individuals working outside the home in a third workplace of some sort, so an office or a factory. And this left women with a dilemma which women had never really faced before, which is what do you do, what we now call work-life balance. Had never really was, for women in the Middle Ages, that just wasn't a thing, because work and life were just all the same thing. And then suddenly you have this situation where you have to figure out, if work happens in a third place, let's say you're a working-class woman in Manchester in the 19th century, you're breastfeeding a baby, but you also have to work a 12-hour shift, which is a 5-mile walk away. What do? It's a problem that women had never faced before. And so women responded in two characteristic ways, and really this was originally mostly a bourgeois women's response. So those women who could afford to stay home and focus just on the home and the family did so. So the home became very much more of a private space for consumption and respite from economic competition and and the market society, and the raising of children. And those women who could afford to inhabit that private domestic space would do so. And there was a huge body of writing that emerged out of that aspect of 19th century women's bourgeois domesticity. The so-called cult of domesticity, which second-wave feminist historiographers tend to read as anti-feminist, but which I read very straightforwardly as making the case for all of those things that women still did that were specifically connected to embodied female experience, motherhood, the raising of children, the life of the home, and making the case for those things, over against this emerging market society, which is very much a place of competition and individualism, and to say these things still matter. We need to make space for them. And to me, that's very straightforwardly a kind of feminism. I think of this as the feminism of care and the feminism of interdependence. But then there was also another side to the same women's response, which focused much more on women's right to enter the market on the same terms as men. And this also had a huge amount of validity to it. Because, I mean, if you want to withdraw into bourgeois domesticity, that's great, as long as your husband likes you and is kind and is honourable and doesn't drink all the money away or beat you. But that's not always the case. And so there were a great many women who very understandably and rightly protested the fact that they were unable to divorce, they were unable to work, they had no custody rights to their children, they had no political personhood separate from men, because they were still living within a legal model that was created for productive households. And these women were saying, no, you don't realise, this leaves us effectively the slaves of our husbands. And some of our husbands are not very nice men, as it turns out. So we need to do something about this. So the earliest women's movement has this polarity between those women making the case for care and interdependence within this new industrial context, and those women challenging our relegation to what they saw as a second-class sphere of care and interdependence, and women's right to enter the market on the same terms as men. These two sides don't always match up, but they're the two poles, the feminism of freedom and the feminism of care, which form, as I see it, the dialectic of the women's movement all the way up to the middle of the 20th century, at which point the feminism of freedom won conclusively. And it did so through another tech transition, really what I think of as the beginning of the cyborg era, our entry into the fourth industrial revolution, which was the legalization in 1960 in the United States, and thence from there throughout the world, of the birth control pill, which was, to my eye, a very underappreciated paradigm shift in how we think about what a person is, how we think about what men and women are, how we think about political agency as such, and also at a very, very fundamental level, what we think medicine and technology are for. In the context of that transition, we found ourselves in an entirely new world where most of the assumptions which informed the women's movement up to that point no longer really apply. So I started thinking about this for the first time when I had a baby. At that point, again, I was confronted with a whole load of new head scratchers. Because up until that point, I'd really taken for granted the fact that the feminism of freedom was the entirety of feminism. This was a long time before I went down the rabbit hole of actually reading what happened in the 19th century. Because after that tech transition in the 20th century, the feminism of care was more or less completely memory hold. And I didn't realize this until I had a baby, and realized just how much of what seemed real and vital and very germane to feminism was just completely invisible within mainstream, what I think of as magazine feminism, the cosmopolitan magazine variety, which is all about the girl boss, and it's all about empowerment, and it's all about doing things on the same terms as men. And there I was, pushing a buggy around the streets of my small town. And, in this very sort of visceral, embodied, connected state with a very young child, nursing at regular intervals and waking up throughout the night and finding that my whole way of thinking and being in the world had been completely rewired by the needs of my dependent child, who I wanted and who I loved. And I was thinking, freedom just has no bearing on this whatsoever. Because, in so many ways, I'm infinitely less free than I used to be, but I'm also a lot happier. I wanted all of this. I don't want to be free from my child. I don't want to just lie there and listen to her crying and think, no, I don't want to get up. I'm not going to. That it just doesn't apply. So at that point, I had to figure out, why is magazine feminism so fixated on treating our bodies as problems to be solved? And it makes more sense this began to make sense to me when I realized that the feminism of freedom won in the second wave. Because it's not as though there are no feminists who talk about motherhood. You know, they're always there. The maternal feminists have been there since the 19th century. It's just that since the 1960s, nobody listens to them. And the pivotal moment really was the legalization of the pill. It was a paradigm shift in medical practice. The central part of that is that up until that point, the aim of medicine, the aim of those technologies that we apply to our bodies, was to repair something that wasn't working in the name of normal health. You know, and this is a way of thinking about what medicine does, which references a sort of normal template. You know, there's a kind of that doctors spend many years learning, you know, what normal health looks like so that they can try and restore people to it when something isn't working. But the pill doesn't do that. The pill does something very different. It interrupts normal health in the name of personal freedom. This is a very different application for technology in the human body. Freedom to have consequence-free sex, freedom from unplanned pregnancy. These new freedoms had huge upsides for wealthy women, but I call this the beginning of the cyborg era because to the extent that the pill made women freer, they were freer only through a new dependency on this technology and only through interrupting the normal function of our bodies. So this is a new kind of liberation, one for women, at the price of dependence on technology, which wages war on the normal human physiology. You know, and to the extent that this makes personhood possible on the same terms as men, for women, this is already a cyborg personhood, because it's inseparable from the technologies that enable it. Just going back to progress for a minute. I don't believe in progress, but that also means I don't believe in regress. So please don't take from this that I think this was categorically all bad. It wasn't categorically all bad. I wouldn't be here speaking to you, were it not for the fact that we all exist in the cyborg era, which grants me several freedoms which were not available to women of earlier generations. Lots of it was very good, for at least some women. More opportunities to plan your life, which I've taken advantage of. More opportunities to study, which I've taken full advantage of, to enter the workplace, you know, which I was terrible at, but let's not talk about that. But it also opens new terrain to the market, specifically the terrain of our bodies. Because once you say it's legitimate to interrupt normal human physiology in the name of personal freedom, there's no reason you should just stop at women's fertility. I mean, in theory, the possibilities for changing or tinkering or upgrading our physiologies are limitless. So 50 years ago, we entered the cyborg era, which we might otherwise know as the transhumanist era. Once you can control pregnancy, you can, well, but let's think about some of the benefits, the freedoms, and the trade-offs. Once you can control pregnancy, this is really a very clear illustration. Some women will be able to take advantage of that to study or enter the workplace. Other women will find that their bodies have been opened up to the market. You can sell sex, for example. Once you can control pregnancy, you can sell sex because sexuality as such has been privatized. And once something's privatized, I own it, I can buy and sell it. It opens space for the libertarian defense of the sex industry. Pornography instantly mushroomed from the 1960s onwards and is now pretty much normalized. I mean, there have been a great many recent lawsuits against Pornhub. I'm not going to repeat the details here because they're so horrific. But a very brief Google will bring up a whole list of the court cases now running against the world's largest porn website from children who were trafficked, raped, abused, and exploited in the name of commercialized sex. Progress always brings trade-offs. The commercialization of sexual access to women is a trade-off, one trade-off, there are many more, of a technology that separates sex from reproduction. Was it worth it? Only an omniscient being could know that. But I don't believe in progress, so it's not obvious to me necessarily that it's just all about never-ending progress. Further downstream, the pill fired the starting gun on a new era in technology, which we're now more than 50 years into, where the object of our research and innovation is humans ourselves. The obstacle is and in which normal human physiology is not something to be referenced when you're trying to heal somebody, but is an obstacle to be overcome, just as normal female fertility is the problem to be solved by the contraceptive pill. For example, we can now act as though it's optional to be the sex we were born as. I mean, if I can use synthetic hormones to interrupt fertility in the name of personal freedom, why should I not use synthetic hormones to convey the appearance of the opposite sex in order to, in the name of individual identity? There's no obvious reason why the one should be licit and the other not. Some even imagine we could end death itself or upload our consciousness to the cloud. Another way of saying the cyborg era is the transhumanist era. What we're really talking about is the fourth industrial revolution. And in this era, the assumptions of industrial era feminism no longer apply. Freedom now means dreaming of liberation from human nature itself. I mean, when we say transhumanism, it sounds like science fiction, but it really is as banal as taking the pill. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Who knows? But the use of technology, but what we're talking about is using technology, biotech really, to escape the normal bounds of our physiology. Once you can interrupt normal in the name of desire, why stop at the pill? Why should we not just outsource pregnancy if we want to? Why not have 3 parents instead of 2? And all of them men. The press reported an instance of exactly that in California last year. And on the one hand, this provides liberation for example, same-sex couples. But it's also a big business. The throuple in question spent more than $170,000 buying their baby. The other side of freedom is always the market, the baby that's bought, the uterus that's rented in order to deliver that baby. Fertility technology is now a big business, because the other side of freedom is always the market. Some celebrities now routinely go to a third party to carry their babies. For example, Elon Musk's baby mama Grimes has had at least 1 child has commissioned at least 1 child by surrogacy. So it's big business. It's also rife with abuse and exploitation. Much as with the porn industry, there may well be some performers who do so consenting and perhaps even enjoy it. I don't know. Apparently this is the case. But there are also cases of abuse and exploitation. There was a big case earlier this year in which women were trafficked into Greece for surrogacy. In effect, they were used against their wills. Their living bodies, they were used as incubators for babies that were being manufactured for sale. A trade in live human men, women and children. This is the stuff of nightmares. So the point I want to keep emphasizing is that these new technologies always bring a dividend of freedom, but they also extend the reach of commerce. So whether you're a beneficiary or a victim depends fundamentally on where you sit in the economic hierarchy. As elite women, such as Grimes, it's probably mostly or all good. But if you're trafficked for surrogacy or a child raped for pornography, maybe not so much. So while it's not true that feminism in its totality only benefits the rich, when we import the liberal emphasis on freedom into the cyborg era, this disproportionately benefits only a very small elite, while it reframes the rest as raw material, sexual playthings, eggs for sale, or incubators for others' babies, which can then also be bought and sold. Our technologies now allow us to commodify humans themselves. Very often, this seems to focus particularly on women's reproductive function. Women have become, ourselves, to paraphrase Marx, a battle over who owns the means of production, or rather reproduction. Feminism needs a better account of women's interests than merely freedom. Because what that brings with it, along with its many goods, is always the market. And markets always have winners and losers. In the transhumanist age, a feminism of just freedom is a feminism only for the winners. It is obvious that these technologies are not going back in the box. I mean, I can stand here and say the pill began the transhumanist era, but that's not going to stop the whole world taking it, right? There's no doing away with biotech. So what does a feminist approach look like to biotech, given that it's already here and has been for 50 years? I believe we need to mount a feminist defense of normal. A feminism fit for the cyborg era accepts the place of technology in our world, but it does so critically and with reference to human normal, always ordered to human nature. Yes, we can have an argument about what constitutes human nature, but we cannot dismiss it as non-existent. It must remain in the picture in order for us to mount any meaningful defense of women as such, as our enabling condition and not as a problem to be solved. So we can use biotech to free ourselves from injury and from disease. Great. If we can do it, we should. We should not be using it to free ourselves from the normal organismic development of a human, of the normal life trajectory of a human. A feminism fit for the cyborg era accepts our normal human physiology, our dimorphic nature as men and as women, the normal course of pregnancy, the normal development of children, and the normal instincts of motherhood and fatherhood, and of the attachment needs of children. The power we now have over our own organisms can be used for good, to the extent that we wield it to restore and to repair. The moment we give in to the temptation to try and improve, our bodies become sites for exploitation. This will always hurt women and children first, and children really most of all. So for a future we can have faith in, as per the bag, I call for a feminism that goes beyond a narrow pursuit of freedom and calls for a critical relation with our technologies, ordered to human nature, not in the name of escaping who we are, but enabling us to be more fully ourselves as men and women in the world that we are in. Thank you.